The band, the Red Krayola, started life as the Red Krayola with a C rather than a K until the Krayola company, who make wax crayons, complained about them. So they changed it to a K. They were, still are, apparently an American experimental psychedelic band who originated in Texas. They were formed in 1966. And there are only two members left. They've had quite a bit of change of members, certainly in the early days. And when they first started, they were a cover band, but they became an experimental band after not very long, I gather. They got a reputation for chaotic live appearances. They had a distinction of not being booked into the same place more than once for a while. They've done quite a lot of art collaborations. They've had some stuff, particularly with fan crowd involvement in their concerts, and they've released maybe 16 albums, but it's as with the band, the kind of nature of what's been recorded and what's actually them and what's a collaboration is a little bit fuzzy at the edges. Hi, my name's Dan. So this is my first encounter with Red Krayola and with this album. It's an interesting album. I'll get into some description in a little bit. I just want to say a few things about the album that I've picked up. So apparently in its first run it sold 50,000 copies, which isn't a huge number of copies for an album to have sold to be on this list that I'm reviewing. But it was one of their best-selling albums as a band. The Chicago Seed, a review in the Chicago Seed claimed it was probably the freakiest album ever recorded. Apparently, the British DJ John Peel reportedly couldn't wait to turn it off, although he warmed to it later. John Peel, as a sidebar, was an immensely respected radio DJ on BBC Radio 1, who did a late night show in which he introduced a lot of alternative and different music to the public. And in a retrospective review, Pitchfork critic Alex Linhart, let's get that right, said listeners weren't sure whether the racket was the result of sharp intellectualism, sheer incompetence, or buzzed-out substance abuse. And that's in some ways the best encapsulation of this album that I've come across. It's the kind of this problematic dichotomy about experimental music that sometimes it can seem to some people as being genius and to other people as being completely talentless. And I think it's possible for something to be both at the same time. Anyway, let's try and do some description, as I said. So about half the tracks, and it alternates, have the name Freeform Freakouts, and they're snippets from apparently a 3-hour session with a group of people called the Familiar Ugly. So the Familiar Ugly were up to 50 superfans, apparently, who would turn up to shows and play. They'd be invited to join in and be on the stage, near the stage, and play whatever they like, however they like. And that would include instruments, but it would also include things like power tools and a motorbike and all sorts of stuff. So this was a feature of their live shows, and whether this was a live session or a studio session for this recording was not entirely clear in what I read, but it was a 3-hour session, and then they have cut up sections of that and put it on the album. And these effectively noise sections are then interspersed with songs, and they blend in and out of them, so it kind of fades in and out. The songs I would describe as being quite psychedelic and hippie, but definitely badly recorded. At times, stuff is out of tune. There's some weird processing that makes things sound like it's like watery, which makes it sound more out of tune than it was. There's playing is, there are notes and structures and whatever to what's going on, but it's fairly obvious that the kind of feel is about the level of competence of a high school band who've had about 2 rehearsals and is just starting to think about learning their instruments properly. The lyrics in general are quite psychedelic as well. So when I first heard it, so I do generally do 2 listens to an album, and in this case, because I didn't know anything about the band or the album, I listened once and then read up. So I got a blind lesson. And in that blind lesson, I thought it was a 1990s album of kind of post-punk noise stuff. And it's not. Obviously, it's a 60s album. So that context, in this case, I think is fairly important because it predates a lot more stuff that came later that had some elements like this. And in some ways, the freeform freakout stuff is about as free an expression of noise as you'll get anywhere in any kind of musical genre. Not that this kind of stuff really lends itself to a genre, but it reminds me of stuff, the really free jazz that I've come across as well in some ways. But, with a lot of stuff going on, huge noise. So this is claimed as a forerunner for punk, for post-punk, for noise rock, for post-rock, and for various things. And definitely some of the things that they did here were embraced more later on in the history of music. In some ways, you could say there's very little display of talent here, as I've described. But there are some, in the songs, there's some use of norms. You've got lyrics, you've got potentially chord sequences, you've got notes that are meant to go together. But in other ways, you could say it's about as subversive and countercultural as you're going to, or counter-normal as you're going to get in terms of experimental. So, for some people, the lack of display of conventional talent, or the lack of the need of conventional talent, is what attracts them to particular albums and to particular music. And so I am recognizing that if you are a person who likes this kind of two fingers up in the face of conventionality, then you might really enjoy this. I'm not actually one of those in terms of when it comes to talent and being able to play instruments. So I don't tend to warm to this sort of stuff particularly. And actually, I would say that I liked the noise tracks more than the songs, because I could feel that was meant to be unfettered, whereas the songs felt like they were meant to be a bit more conventional. I'm not sure if I would have liked it as much if it was all just the noise. I think it probably needed that, but I think I would have liked it better if the songs were better done, to be honest. Is it an important album? Maybe. Is it different? Most definitely. Is it a pleasant album to listen to for an average listener? Well, it's very niche listening, I would say. And as something to just pick up and stick on to listen to for the pleasurable experience of listening to music, you've got to be quite a special person to want to listen to this for that. So that's what I think. Please let me know what you think. I always wonder with albums like this if I'm going to get shot down by somebody who says, no, this is absolute genius. And if that's you, I'd love you to please explain what is the genius in this that you see. I'm always interested to hear what different people get out of music that I don't necessarily resonate with. And that's it from me for now.